Paul Williams stopped in the middle of his company's hallway and listened to the silence. It was 7 o'clock in the evening, the time when the office of Williams Solutions transformed from a busy beehive into a deserted space where only the servers hummed and the lights on the printers blinked. At 42 years old, 20 of which he had dedicated to the industry, he had learned to appreciate these minutes. It was precisely in such moments that one could feel the true pulse of the company. No work noise, but something deeper and more truthful. Hello, I'm Sarah. On this channel, I present to you the courageous, real-life stories of women. Please note, in all the stories you'll hear, names have been changed and visuals have been created to respect privacy. If you'd like to share your story and inspire other women, you can reach us through the channel's About section. I would be honored to be your voice. No, I invite you to listen to the story of a woman who found the strength to stand tall, despite life's challenges. He was on his way to his office with a folder full of financial reports when he heard the patter of small feet. Paul managed to turn around just in time before something light bumped into his legs. A girl of about 6 recoiled, looked up at him with big brown eyes, and pressed her lips together guiltily. "Oh, sorry," she squeaked, trying to hide a crumpled coloring book behind her back. Paul couldn't help but smile. In this sterile world of servers and business plans, a child's presence seemed like something incredibly alive and real. "It's all right," he said, squatting down. "What is your name?" "Mila." The girl stopped hiding the coloring book and showed him a picture of a slightly crooked pink unicorn. "I'm not disturbing Mom here. Really. I'm sitting very quietly and coloring. You believe me, right?" Paul took a candy in a shiny wrapper out of his pocket. It was a habit left over from the days when his own daughter was the same age. However, his daughter Katie was now studying at NYU in New York and only called once a month. Every conversation with her was now a polite exchange of news, lacking the childlike carefree nature he saw before him right now. "Here, go ahead, but tell your mom that the man gave it to you." "Okay," Mila beamed. She grabbed the candy and pressed it to her chest as if it were the most valuable treasure in the world. "You are nice," she stated with the seriousness only children possess. "Not like the other men here. They walk around with grim faces all the time and don't notice anyone." Paul was just about to stand up and continue on his way when the girl suddenly tugged at the sleeve of his jacket. "Do you want me to tell you a secret?" she whispered conspiratorially, looking around as seriously as if it were a state secret. "A secret?" Paul raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What kind of secret?" Mila leaned closer to him. "I heard a lady talking on the phone today," the girl began, looking at him with absolute seriousness. "She was in the room where Mom is mopping the floor, the room with the big cabinets and the flower by the window. Mom told me to wait in the hall, but I was thirsty and went to look for her. And that's when I heard it." Paul felt something tighten inside him. His instinct, sharpened by years of business management, immediately sounded the alarm. It's amazing how a child's honesty can change everything. What do you think Paul should do with this information? Let me know in the comments. "And what did you hear?" he asked as calmly as possible so as not to show his sudden interest. "The lady said she was going to give someone important papers tomorrow." Mila frowned as she thought. "She said he wouldn't even notice. She said it was his own fault because they don't appreciate her and don't pay her properly. And then she said something about getting a new job where everything would be better. And she said, on Friday it will all be over and I'll be free." The blood ran cold in Paul's veins. He straightened up, feeling a chill run down his spine. "Mila, listen to me carefully," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can you describe this lady to me? What did she look like?" The girl thought for a moment and bit her lower lip. "She has long red nails," she began, counting on her fingers. "As shiny as a princess in a cartoon, and she smells like strawberries." I liked the smell. "And she has dark hair down to her shoulders, and she wears high shoes that go click-clack on the floor. Mom says you can't walk well in them, but that they look pretty." The floor dropped out from under him. This description fit only one person. Sarah Brennan, the head of the HR department, 46 years old, 5 years with the company, always groomed, always with a flawless manicure the color of ripe cherries. The strawberry perfume was her trademark, known to everyone in the office, announcing her presence from several feet away. "Thank you very much, Mila," he said, trying to smile. "You helped me a lot. But let this be our shared secret." "Okay, don't tell anyone. Not even your mom. Not for now. This is important." The girl nodded willingly. "I can keep secrets. Mom always says she can rely on me." Paul watched her run back to her coloring books while he pulled out his phone and walked briskly toward his office. His fingers tapped on the screen, dialing his secretary's number. Allison Scott, 29 years old, had been working for him for 3 years. Dutiful, precise, and someone who never asked unnecessary questions. "Allison, are you still in the office?" he asked the moment she picked up. "Yes, Mr. Williams. I'm just finishing the reports." "Very good. Listen carefully." He entered his office and closed the door. "In 15 minutes, I need the entire executive management here. Everyone who is in the city. An urgent meeting. Call them all together." Surprise resonated in Allison's voice. "It's already late. Some might be gone." "Everyone who is reachable," Paul interrupted gruffly. "George Reynolds, Sarah Brennan, Owen Matthews, Chris Collins, Victoria Jennings. This is not negotiable." Meeting point in the conference room. Topic: internal audit. "Understood. I will contact them immediately." Paul sank into his armchair and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The room with the big cabinets and the flower by the window, that was the HR department archive. Employee personnel files, employment contracts, and social security documents were kept there. But above all, the safe with the commercial contracts was there, to which only department heads had access. Sarah had legitimate, official access to it. He opened his laptop and began scouring the internal database. Sarah Brennan, head of HR since 2020. An impeccable reputation, not a single complaint. Salary $6,000 a month plus quarterly bonuses. By market standards, that was decent, though not an outstanding offer. "They don't appreciate her and don't pay her properly," the girl's words echoed in his head. Paul opened a file with the latest data on the competition. Status Tech Incorporated, a company that had expanded aggressively in the last 6 months and poached customers from him. 3 major contracts had gone to them in the last 4 months. At the time, he'd chalked it up to aggressive marketing and price dumping. But what if the reason lay deeper? What if they knew the terms of his offer in advance and simply undercut the price? The door opened a crack and Allison, a tall blonde in a sharp pantsuit, entered. "Mr. Williams, everyone is gathering. George Reynolds was already home, but is on his way. He promised to be here in 20 minutes. The others are already en route. Sarah Brennan said she had private plans for the evening, but would come." "Good." Paul nodded. "Prepare the conference room. And contact Owen Matthews separately. Tell him to pull the data on access to the archive rooms for the last week before the meeting. All entries and exits. Anyone who used their electronic badge. I am particularly interested in the personnel archive." Allison noted it down, but her look betrayed concern. "Has something happened?" "Possibly." Paul stood up and took his jacket off the hook. "Very likely, actually. But this stays between us for now." Left alone, he stepped to the window. Down on the illuminated parking lot stood a few cars, presumably belonging to employees working late. His gaze slid over the dark windows of the neighboring office buildings. Somewhere out there in this concrete desert of the business district sat the competitors. And if Sarah really intended to hand over data to them, he had to act immediately. He remembered hiring her 5 years ago. The interview had gone smoothly. An experienced HR professional, legal background, knowledge of legislation, recommendations from previous jobs. Sarah had seemed like a professional capable of building a clear system, and she had done it, a perfect system for herself. Paul returned to his desk and opened the internal company agreement. Section on Trade Secrets. Point 34. Employees who have access to confidential information undertake not to disclose it to third parties under penalty of disciplinary and material liability. Point 37. The disclosure of documents containing trade secrets without written permission from the management constitutes a gross violation of the employment contract and is grounds for immediate termination. The wording was clear. He just had to prove the act. The phone vibrated. A message from Owen Matthews. Asterisk Mr. Williams. I am preparing the access data. Is it something serious? Asterisk. Very serious, Paul typed in response. He looked at the clock. 12 minutes had passed, 3 more to go. And then would begin what could either save the company or destroy it from the inside. Because if Sarah was actually preparing a data leak, it meant someone from the competition already knew their weaknesses, knew who they worked with, what conditions they offered customers, and what technologies they were developing. Paul left the office and went to the conference room. On the way, he saw Linda Taylor, a middle-aged woman in a washed-out gray smock with a cleaning cloth in her hand. She was wiping the floor near the stairs, laboriously removing shoe marks. When she saw him, she stepped back and set the water bucket aside. Good evening, Paul said, stopping. Are you Linda? Good evening. Yes. The woman nodded and looked at him. Is something wrong? I cleaned everything properly. Everything is fine, he assured her. Is your daughter here? Yes, Mila. Linda tensed up even more. She isn't disturbing anyone. She sits very quietly. I'm watching her. I just don't have anyone to leave her with. My husband passed away 3 years ago. I have no relatives. The kindergarten doesn't allow children after 6 p.m., but my shift starts at 5 p.m. I don't know how else to do it. That's not what this is about. Paul raised his hand to stop her justifications. Everything is good. I just met her in the hallway. A sweet girl, smart and well-behaved. Thank you. Linda relaxed a little, but distrust could still be read in her eyes. People in her position were used to expecting trouble from superiors. Paul nodded and walked on. Lights were already on in the conference room. Voices could be heard. He pushed the door open and entered. 4 people sat at the long table. George Reynolds, the finance director, 58 years old, gray-haired with the heavy gaze of an experienced accountant. Chris Collins, the deputy director, 33 years old, ambitious and energetic. Victoria Jennings, the company lawyer, 31 years old, always composed and precise. And Sarah Brennan. She sat with her legs crossed, scrolling through her phone. Her red nails tapped on the screen. The strawberry smell was indeed perceptible even from here. Mild annoyance was visible on her face. Presumably, the meeting had crossed her evening plans. Good evening, Paul said and closed the door. Thank you for coming so quickly. Is Owen delayed or already here? A voice sounded at the door. Owen Matthews, the head of security, 45 years old, a former detective, close-cropped hair and fit, entered. He held a folder in his hands. The access data, as requested. Excellent. Paul sat at the head of the table and let his gaze wander over those present. Colleagues, we have a problem. A serious problem that requires an immediate decision. Sarah raised her eyes from her phone and Paul caught her gaze. For a split second, something flashed in it. Watchfulness, perhaps even fear, but she quickly recovered and put on an expression of polite interest. What happened, Mr. Williams? She asked, and not a hint of worry resonated in her voice. Paul slowly opened his laptop. You are about to find out, he said. Everyone is about to find out. Paul let his gaze sweep the room again, pausing to let everyone feel the seriousness of the moment. George Reynolds listened attentively, his gray brows furrows. Chris Collins straightened up in his chair and put his phone aside. Victoria Jennings took out her notepad and a pen, the lawyer's habit of recording everything important. Sarah Brennan remained in her relaxed pose, but her fingers no longer glided over the phone screen. An hour and a half ago, Paul began, I received information about a possible leak of commercial information from our company. It involves documents with confidential data that could be passed on to third parties. A data leak? George Reynolds frowned. Where does the information come from? The source is reliable, Paul answered briefly. I cannot say more about it at the moment. What is important is this. If it is true, we must act immediately. Owen, what do you have for us? Owen Matthews opened the folder and placed several printouts on the table. At your request, I checked the electronic badge data for the last week, he said, running his finger along the lines. The personnel archive. The room is under control. Access only with an electronic key. 5 people have access. You, Mr. Williams, Mr. Reynolds as finance director, Ms. Brennan as head of HR, Mr. Collins as deputy director, and myself as head of security. And who is there this week? Paul asked. You were there on Monday morning to get the personnel file of a new employee. Owen went through the list. Mr. Reynolds checked the contracts with subcontractors on Monday. Ms. Brennan was there 3 times. On Monday at 6 p.m., on Wednesday at 7 p.m., and today at 6:30 p.m. Paul turned his gaze to Sarah. She listened without changing her expression, but he noticed she pressed her lips together a little tighter. Ms. Brennan, Paul addressed her. Can you explain why you needed to go to the archive 3 times outside of working hours this week? She shrugged, a gesture Paul found all too demonstratively indifferent. I work with personnel documents constantly, she answered in a calm voice. This week I was preparing reports for the IRS and checking employment contracts. That is part of my duties. Why should I account for exactly when I do that? Because there is reason to believe that information may have leaked from the archive, Paul said harshly. And your visits outside of working hours seem suspicious. Suspicious? Sarah laughed briefly, but the laugh sounded forced. Mr. Williams, I have worked in this company for 5 years. I have an impeccable reputation. On what basis can you suspect me at all? On the basis of the Defend Trade Secrets Act, Victoria Jennings interjected without lifting her eyes from her notepad. Any employee with access to confidential information can be investigated if there is a reasonable suspicion of disclosure. The employer has the right to conduct an internal investigation. Exactly, Paul nodded. Victoria, please briefly explain what this law regulates. The lawyer turned a page in her notepad. It establishes the legal framework for the protection of trade secrets. Those that constitute a trade secret include findings that have actual or potential economic value due to their being unknown to third parties. In our case, these are contracts with customers, terms of cooperation, pricing, and technical developments. The law provides for liability in case of disclosure. An employee guilty of disclosure is obliged to pay damages. In addition, disciplinary liability up to immediate termination is possible. That is all just theory, Sarah said coldly. But you have absolutely no proof that I have disclosed anything. You cannot just accuse me without reason. Owen, Paul turned to the security chief. What about the video cameras? There are cameras in the hallways, Owen replied. There are no cameras inside the archive itself. Data protection requires that. But entry and exit are recorded. I can pull up the recordings from the last week. Do that, Paul ordered. I want to see who went in when and what was carried out. That is a violation of my rights, Sarah protested. You are not allowed to monitor me. Yes, we are, Victoria threw in. Video surveillance in common areas is lawful. You signed a consent form when you were hired. Furthermore, there is a clause in your employment contract stating that the employer is entitled to conduct an internal investigation using all available means in case of suspected violation of trade secrets. Sarah paled. Paul saw her trying to keep her composure, but the tension was growing. George, Paul turned to the finance director. Tell me, have there been any oddities with the financial documents lately? Unauthorized copying? Requests outside of one's department? George Reynolds thought and rubbed his chin. Now that you ask, yes, there was something. The day before yesterday, I noticed that someone requested a summary of client contracts from the last year from the accounting system, and the request did not come from the finance department. Where did it come from? Paul asked sharply. From the HR department. George looked at Sarah. I thought at the time it was for some internal report and didn't attach any importance to it. That was for a report, Sarah said quickly. I was preparing an analysis of salaries compared to company revenue. That is normal practice. Show us this report, Paul requested. Silence fell. Sarah stared at him, and for the first time, helplessness appeared in her eyes. I'm not finished with it yet, she finally said. It's a draft. Where is this draft? Paul persisted. Can we look at it on your computer? No, she answered too quickly. That is working material. I am not obliged to show it before completion. Chris Collins, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward. Miss Brennan, he said quietly, if you have nothing to hide, why not simply show us the file? That would clear up all questions. Because it is humiliating, she flared up. I am being accused without evidence. I have worked here for 5 years. And you are holding an interrogation here because of some rumors. These are not rumors, Paul said calmly. This is information that I consider credible. And as long as you provide no explanations, the investigation continues. He stood up and paced the room. Outside it was already twilight. The city lights were turning on one by one. Somewhere out there in one of those buildings sat the people from Status Tech, waiting for documents that could give them an advantage. Paul felt time running out. Owen, he said, pull up the camera recordings. I am particularly interested in the moments when Ms. Brennan left the archive. Check if she had folders, files, or USB sticks in her hand. Anything that could contain information. Understood. Owen nodded and reached for his tablet. Victoria, Paul continued, prepare the legal justification for the internal investigation. We need all documents confirming our right to check an employee's actions and get Ms. Brennan's employment contract, especially the section on trade secrets. Consider it done. Victoria wrote quickly. George, Paul turned to the finance director. I need a list of all documents Ms. Brennan had access to, especially those concerning our key customers and strategic contracts. Good, George nodded. I'll take care of it immediately. Sarah jumped abruptly from her chair. I am not obliged to sit here and listen to this, she screamed. You have no right to detain me. Sit down, Paul said icily. This is an official meeting and it is not over yet. Matters concerning the security of the company are being discussed in your presence. If you leave now, it will be considered a refusal to testify and will serve as additional grounds for the investigation. Sarah slowly sank back into the armchair. Her hands were trembling, and she hid them under the table. Chris. Paul looked at his deputy. Contact the IT department. Have them check Ms. Brennan's corporate emails from the last month. I am particularly interested in emails to external addresses and any attachments with large volumes. Is that even legal? Chris asked. Absolutely, Victoria confirmed. Corporate email is property of the company. The employer has the right to check employee correspondence if there is suspicion of a violation of work discipline or disclosure of trade secrets. That is covered by case law. Chris nodded and left the conference room, pulling out his phone. Paul sat back at the head of the table and looked at Sarah. She stared at the tabletop and looked truly frightened for the first time that evening. Ms. Brennan, he said more quietly, if you know something, you better say it now. If it turns out that you actually plan to hand over documents to the competition, the consequences will be far more serious, up to criminal prosecution. Criminal. She raised her eyes to him. The Defend Trade Secrets Act, Victoria explained. Betrayal of trade secrets. The penalty can be a fine or imprisonment of up to 3 years. If the act caused significant damage, it is up to 5 years. Sarah covered her face with her hands. I didn't want to. She began, but then broke off. Go on, Paul said gently. She shook her head and straightened up again to regain her composure. No, I won't say anything without a lawyer. That is your right, Paul agreed. But the investigation will not be stopped by that. The door opened and Owen returned with the tablet in hand. Mr. Williams, I pulled up the camera recordings, he said. There is something interesting. He placed the tablet on the table and started the video. The hallway in front of the archive appeared on the screen. The timestamp showed today at 6:30 p.m. Look here. Owen pointed at the image. Here Ms. Brennan enters the archive. Empty hands, only her handbag over her shoulder. Everyone leaned toward the screen. Indeed, the recording showed Sarah holding the electronic key to the reader and disappearing behind the door. And now watch what happens next. Owen fast-forwarded. She comes out again after 23 minutes. The image played on. The archive door opened and Sarah stepped into the hallway. In her hands, she held a thin folder of documents. Stop, Paul said. Enlarge that. Owen zoomed into the image. It was a completely ordinary cardboard folder, but a red sticker with the inscription confidential was visible on it. That is the marking for documents containing trade secrets, George explained. We use such stickers for contracts with key clients. Everyone looked at Sarah. She sat motionless, staring at the table. She was caught, but tried to justify her actions. Do you think her reasons for feeling underappreciated were valid, even if her actions weren't? What would you have done in her shoes? And what happened to this folder? Paul asked. Owen switched the recording. Then she walks down the hall to her office. The camera there has a blind spot, but after 4 minutes she leaves the office. She no longer has the folder with her. Where did the folder go? Asked Chris, who had just returned to the room. That is what we need to find out, Paul said, not taking his eyes off Sarah. Ms. Brennan, would you like to say something about this? She slowly raised her head. Her face was pale. Her red nails clawed into the armrests of the chair. She began, but her voice failed. At that moment, Chris's phone rang. He glanced at the display and looked at Paul. IT department, he said. They say there is urgent information regarding Ms. Brennan's emails. Paul nodded. Put it on speaker. Chris pressed the button and the system administrator's voice sounded in the conference room. Mr. Collins, we checked Sarah Brennan's corporate emails. Several emails were found that were sent to an external address. The emails were deleted from the sent folder, but we were able to restore them from the archive. In one of the emails, sent the day before yesterday, there is an attached file with contracts and there is a text. Read the text, Paul ordered. Asterisk, the contracts will be available to you by Friday. Afterward, we will discuss the conditions for my transfer. I hope your offer will be more appropriate than what I have now. Asterisk. Dead silence fell. Sarah buried her face in her hands and her shoulders began to shake. Paul slowly straightened in his chair. I think, he said quietly, we now have all the evidence. Sarah Brennan sat there without lifting her head. Only her heavy breathing betrayed her state. The red nails that had tapped so confidently on the phone display just an hour ago were now clawing into the edge of the table. Paul looked at her and felt a strange mixture of disappointment and relief. Disappointment because he had trusted this person for 5 years. Relief because the worst fears had been confirmed before the damage became irreparable. Chris, tell IT to export all restored emails and document the send times, Paul ordered. They should prepare a full report with technical details. We will need that for the files. Consider it done. Chris nodded and bent over his phone. George Reynolds leaned back in his chair and shook his head. Sarah, how could you? 5 years of work, a stable salary, bonuses. Why? Less anger than incomprehension resonated in his voice. She raised her head and Paul saw that her eyes were red. But they were not tears of remorse, but rather the anger and despair of a cornered person. A stable salary, she repeated bitterly. $6,000 a month. Do you know what HR directors earn in normal companies? $8,500 to $10,000. And what do I get? A salary increase of $150 once a year. And that even though I carry the entire department alone. That is no excuse, Paul said harshly. If you were unhappy with the conditions, you could have come and talked to me. You could have looked for another job legally, but not sold information to the competition. Talked. Sarah laughed scornfully. I was with you 6 months ago asking for a salary adjustment. Do you know what the answer was? Asterisk, not right now. Crisis, we have to wait. Asterisk, and then I find out that the new IT manager got $7,500 immediately. Because he is a man, she challenged. Because a programmer is more important than an HR person. Because the IT department brings revenue to the company, Paul answered coldly. And the HR department is a support unit. You knew that perfectly well when you took the job. Sarah jumped up from her chair. Her face was distorted. Support unit. So that's how you see us. I work 12 hours a day, solve conflicts, manage documentation, recruit personnel, and you call that support. Sit down, Paul ordered. Emotions won't help now. She sat down slowly again, but her gaze continued to spray poison. Victoria Jennings, who had been silent until then, added matter-of-factly, Ms. Brennan, I must officially inform you of the consequences, she said in a calm, professional tone. Currently, the following evidence exists against you. First, unauthorized access to documents that are not part of your immediate duties. Second, copying and removing confidential information. Third, the attempt to pass this information to a competitor company. This is considered a gross violation of work discipline and betrayal of trade secrets. I haven't passed anything on yet. Sarah screamed. I sent the email. Yes, but you haven't given them the documents yet. That doesn't matter, Victoria continued. According to the law, the disclosure of information already constitutes a violation. It is not required that the third party has already used it. The act of transmitting or the intent to transmit already establishes the violation. Owen Matthews scrolled on his tablet and suddenly raised his head. Mr. Williams, there is something else, he said. I checked the phone calls from Ms. Brennan's company number for the last 2 weeks. 7 calls to the same number. Call duration between 5 and 15 minutes. I checked the number in the database. It is registered to the company Status Tech Incorporated Personnel Development Department. George Reynolds jumped up. Status Tech. The very ones who took the last 3 contracts from us. Exactly, confirmed Paul. Now it is clear where they got the information about our terms. Sarah pressed her lips together and turned away toward the window. Ms. Brennan. Paul leaned forward. You understand that you can still partially save the situation. Tell us everything. What exactly did you pass on? Who exactly were you in contact with? Which documents did you copy? She remained silent and stared into the darkness outside. If you refuse to cooperate, Paul continued, we will hand over the documents to law enforcement agencies. Then it will not just be a termination, but a criminal case. Go ahead and hand them over, Sarah said dully. My career here is over anyway. Your career is over anywhere, Chris threw in harshly. After something like this, no reputable company will hire you again. Reputation is everything in our industry, and you just destroyed yours. Sarah flinched but remained silent. Paul looked at Victoria. The lawyer nodded barely perceptibly. Legally, they were on firm ground. There was enough evidence. Good, Paul said. Since you refuse to provide explanations, we will move on to the formal procedure. Victoria, name the next steps. Jennings turned a new page in her block. According to the Washington State Labor Code, Section 49.12, immediate termination of the employment relationship by the employer is possible if there is a compelling reason. The betrayal of trade secrets constitutes such a compelling reason. Before the decision, the employer is obliged to invite the employee for a hearing. If testimony is refused, a corresponding protocol is made. Ms. Brennan, Paul took a blank sheet of paper from a folder and placed it in front of her. I hereby officially request you to provide a written statement regarding the established facts. You have 2 working days to do so. A refusal will be recorded in a protocol. She looked at the sheet, then at Paul. And if I refuse, then you will receive the termination notice for disclosure of trade secrets in 2 days, Victoria explained. It will be noted accordingly in your reference letters. In addition, the company reserves the right to sue for damages. What kind of damage? Sarah laughed nervously. I haven't even managed to hand everything over yet. George Reynolds opened his laptop and turned the screen toward her. 3 contracts we lost in the last 4 months, he said, showing a table. The potential profit amounts to $150,000. If it is proven that the loss is connected to the information leak you facilitated, the company has the right to claim these damages. Sarah turned ash pale. $150,000? Have you gone crazy? I've never had that much money in my whole life. Then you will just pay it off in installments for the rest of your life, George said indifferently. Or your property will be seized. Do you own an apartment? She nodded, unable to get a word out. There you go, the finance director continued. So there is something to take. Paul raised his hand and stopped George. Wait a moment. Ms. Brennan, I ask you one last time. Are you ready to cooperate? Tell us everything you passed on, to whom, and when. If you do, we might find a way to minimize the consequences. She sat there, head bowed, her shoulders shaking slightly. Finally, she raised her eyes, in which stood pure hopelessness. They promised me $8,500 a month, she said quietly, and the position of HR director. They said I was too good a specialist to sit on a cleaner's salary. On a cleaner's salary? Paul repeated. $6,000 is a cleaner's salary for my level. Sarah flared up. I am a lawyer and psychologist. I have 2 diplomas in additional education, 10 years of experience, and I earn like a secretary. Paul shook his head. Continue. What did you prepare for them? Sarah fell silent for a moment, obviously weighing her options. Then she sighed heavily. The list of our key customers, she began, with contacts, contract terms, and contract sums. Also copies of 3 contracts with the biggest clients. They contain the payment terms, deadlines, and technical specifications. She paused. And? Paul asked sternly. And an internal document about the company's planned expansion for the next year, she confessed. It listed the names of the cities where you wanted to open branches, the budgets, and the timelines. Chris slammed his fist on the table. That is the strategy plan. That is top secret. How did you even get access to that? Mr. Reynolds left it in the archive after a meeting, Sarah said quietly. I saw the folder when I was getting personnel files. I took photos of it with my phone. George turned red in the face. I put it down there for 5 minutes while I got myself a coffee. Those 5 minutes were enough, Paul remarked dryly. Go on, Miss Brennan. When did you hand over these documents? I haven't handed them over yet, she said quickly. Honestly, I only sent an email with part of the information, the client list. That was the day before yesterday. I was supposed to hand over the rest tomorrow evening. We arranged to meet in a cafe. Owen leaned toward Paul and said quietly, if the meeting is scheduled for tomorrow, we can arrange a controlled delivery. We record the acceptance of the documents by representatives of Status Tech. It was a clever but risky thought. Victoria, is that legal? He asked. The lawyer nodded. Yes, if we act within the framework of protecting company interests. We can bring in a witness. It is important not to provoke a crime, but to record what was already planned. And if they cancel the meeting? Chris asked. Then we still have proof of intent, Victoria explained. The correspondence, the calls, Ms. Brennan's statement. That is enough for termination and a civil lawsuit. Paul looked at Sarah. She sat slumped and looked completely defeated. Paul made a tough call, used Sarah to expose the competition or just fire her. Was it the right move to make a deal with the person who betrayed him? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Are you ready to cooperate in documenting the handover? He asked. She raised her head and fear flashed in her eyes. That means you want me to go to the meeting and do what? You go there, hand over the prepared documents, and we document the process of the handover, Owen explained. That proves that Status Tech knowingly accepts stolen information. We can then sue them. And what happens to me? Sarah's voice trembled. You will be fired regardless, Paul said honestly. But if you cooperate with the investigation, we can refrain from suing you. We will limit it to the termination. If you refuse, the lawsuit for $150,000 and possibly a criminal case will be added to the termination. You have the choice. Sarah covered her face with her hands. Several long seconds passed. Good, she finally said. I will help you, but only if you promise not to sue me. Paul looked at Victoria. She nodded. Such a condition can be recorded in writing. Agreed, Paul said. Victoria, prepare the agreement. You help with documenting the handover. We waive the civil lawsuit. But the termination stands. When is the meeting? Tomorrow at 7 p.m., Sarah answered. Cafe Central Downtown. I am supposed to come with a USB stick containing the remaining documents. Good. Owen nodded. We will prepare everything. Cameras, microphones, witnesses, everything will be documented. Paul stood up. We are finished for today. Miss Brennan, you are released from duty starting tomorrow. Access to work systems will be blocked. Owen will contact you tomorrow with detailed instructions. The others prepare the documents. George, calculate the actual damage. Victoria, prepare all legal papers. Owen, take care of organizing the operation. We meet tomorrow at 5 p.m. for the detailed briefing. Everyone nodded and began packing up. Sarah rose unsteadily and walked to the door. On the threshold, she turned around once more. Mr. Williams, she said quietly, I didn't want to harm the company. I just wanted a better life. Everyone wants a better life, Paul answered, but not everyone betrays those who trusted them for it. She nodded and walked out. The door closed with a soft click behind her. Paul stepped to the window and looked out at the nocturnal city. Somewhere out there, in one of the offices, the people from Status Tech were waiting for information that could give them an advantage, but tomorrow they would experience an unpleasant surprise instead. "Do you think she'll flee?" asked Chris, who had stepped up to him. "She won't flee," Paul said surely. "She has nowhere to go, and she knows it." He turned to the people remaining in the room. "Thank you all for the speed. Tomorrow will be a difficult day. Go home, rest. I need you all in top form." When everyone had gone, Paul remained alone in the dark conference room. He thought about what could have happened if not for the chance encounter with the little girl in the hallway. The company could have lost customers, its reputation, and a lot of money. And all because of the grievance of a single person who thought she was underpaid. Paul turned off the light and stepped out into the hallway. Another sleepless night lay ahead of him. The next day began for Paul Williams at 6 a.m. He had practically not slept. All night he had gone through the possible scenarios of the upcoming operation in his mind. Too much could go wrong. Sarah could change her mind and not appear at the meeting. The representatives of Status Tech could get suspicious and abort the handover. Or even worse, they could try to talk their way out of it by claiming ignorance, that they didn't know the information was stolen. Paul sat in the kitchen of his apartment with a cup of strong coffee and looked through the documents Victoria had sent him late the previous evening, the draft of the cooperation agreement with Sarah, the legal justification for documenting the handover, and the damage calculation from George. Everything was worked out down to the smallest detail, but the unrest would not leave him. He arrived at the office at 8:30 a.m. Usually, the company was just waking up at this time. Employees trickled in around 9, drank coffee, and discussed the day's plans. But today the atmosphere was different. Paul sensed the tension in the air. People exchanged glances and whispered. News spreads quickly in such companies, and although yesterday's meeting was confidential, rumors had leaked. Allison Scott received him in front of his office with a folder full of documents and a worried expression. "Mr. Williams, good morning," she said. There was a call from Status Tech. A certain Victor Kane introduced himself as development director and asked for a callback during the day. He said it was an urgent matter. Paul paused. Kane. That was exactly the one Sarah had made the arrangements with. Owen Matthews had checked the contacts yesterday. Allison flipped through her notes. Yes, exactly. Sarah's calls went to his number. Interesting. Paul frowned. That means they are nervous. Good, note that down. I'll call back after lunch. Let them hang in uncertainty for a while. He went into his office and called Owen Matthews first thing. Owen, how are the preparations? Everything is going according to plan, the security chief answered. I checked Cafe Central personally this morning. A small place, 3 rooms, medium visitor frequency. I coordinated with the manager. They allowed us to install a camera in the room where business meetings usually take place. We said we are checking the staff. Additionally, our man will sit at a neighboring table with a directional microphone. Furthermore, Sarah will have a dictaphone in her bag. She will definitely come. I spoke with her on the phone this morning. She confirmed it. She said Kane texted her last night and confirmed the time. They suspect nothing. Excellent. Who are we taking as witnesses? You, me, Victoria Jennings as a lawyer, Owen listed, and I arranged with an officer from the local precinct. Officially, he will just happen to drop by, but on my signal, he will enter and document the handover process. That lends legitimacy to the entire procedure. Well thought out, Paul praised. We meet at 5 p.m. in my office for the final briefing. He hung up and thought. The call from Kane was disturbing. Maybe something had gone wrong on their end. Or they just wanted to clarify details, or they had already realized Sarah was blown and were now trying to probe the ground. At 10 a.m., George Reynolds came into his office with a thick folder. Mr. Williams, I have finished the calculations, the finance director said, placing tables on the desk. Look here, 3 contracts we lost in the last 4 months. The first, Technocorp, went to Status Tech in August. Contract some $50,000. The second, Alpine Systems, went in September, $55,000. The third, West Logistics, in October, $45,000. And the total result? Paul asked. $150,000. George ran his finger along the total line. These are the direct losses. If we add the lost profit and the reputational damage, the figure almost doubles. Paul nodded. Can you prove the connection between the leak and the loss of the contracts? Partially. I checked the conditions Status Tech offered our customers. In all 3 cases, their offer was 5 to 7% lower than ours, and exactly by as much as was necessary to undercut the price without going into the red. As if they knew exactly what sum we had quoted. They did know, Paul said grimly. Sarah transmitted our commercial offers to them. They simply undercut the price and grabbed the customers. Exactly. George packed the documents back into the folder. That is called unfair competition. The fine for legal entities is substantial, plus damages. That means after today's meeting, we have every reason to sue them. George left and Paul remained alone with his thoughts. He knew that a court case could drag on for months, if not years. But it was important on principle to show that one could not play such games with his company. At 2 p.m., Victoria Jennings called him. Mr. Williams, I contacted Sarah. The lawyer reported. She signed the cooperation agreement. Officially, she commits to appear at the meeting, hand over the prepared documents, and testify about her contacts with representatives of Status Tech. In return, we commit not to file a civil lawsuit against her. The termination remains. She hasn't collapsed. She's holding up bravely. Victoria paused briefly, but you can tell she is very shaken. She asked what will happen after the dismissal. I honestly told her that with such a note in her reference, it will be difficult to gain a foothold again, especially in our industry. That was her decision, Paul said harshly. No one forced her to sell information. I understand that, Victoria agreed. It's just that in the end, she is only a human who made a mistake. Mistakes are different. Paul rubbed the bridge of his nose. Forgetting to send an email, that is a mistake. Consciously stealing a trade secret and selling it to the competition, that is betrayal. After the conversation with Victoria, Paul decided to call Kane back after all. It was interesting to hear what a man had to say who would be caught stealing someone else's information in a few hours. He dialed the number. After the 3rd ring, a voice answered. Victor Kane, good day. Good day. This is Paul Williams from Williams Solutions. He introduced himself. You called this morning. Mr. Williams. The voice became even more animated. Thank you for the callback. Do you know what this is about? I would like to meet with you and discuss a possible collaboration between our companies. Collaboration. Paul suppressed a smirk. As far as I know, we are competitors. Well, competitors is a big word, Kane laughed. The market is big. There is room for everyone. I think we could find connecting points, divide up spheres of influence, so to speak. That sounds like an interesting idea, Paul said cautiously. And what exactly do you propose? Let's meet and discuss this over a cup of coffee, Kane suggested. Maybe this evening. I am in your area anyway. Today won't work, unfortunately, Paul declined. I have important appointments. Maybe another time. Too bad. Disappointment resonated in Kane's voice. Well then, we'll be in touch later. All the best, Mr. Williams. Goodbye. Paul hung up and thought. Kane had obviously tried to probe the ground. Maybe they had already smelled a rat. Or was this an attempt to divert attention before the evening meeting with Sarah? In any case, everything would become clear in a few hours. At 5 p.m., the entire group gathered in Paul's office. Owen spread a sketch of the cafe on the table and placed figures representing the participants of the operation. Look here, he said, pointing to the plan. Sarah comes first and takes the table by the window in the back room. That is her usual spot. They arrange to meet right there. Kane comes a little later. That is how it is agreed. Our man Maximilian from security will sit at the neighboring table disguised as a guest. He has a directional microphone disguised as a tablet. The camera hangs over the bar and captures the entire room. And where will we be? Victoria asked. In the car in the parking lot, Owen answered. Maximilian will transmit the audio in real time. As soon as Sarah hands over the USB stick or documents, I give the signal to the officer. He will enter, identify himself, and ask everyone to come to the precinct for a statement. There we create the protocol and record the statements. And if Kane tries to destroy the USB stick? Chris voiced his concerns. He won't have time for that, Owen said surely. The officer will enter 30 seconds after the handover, a minute maximum. In that time, he can't do anything physically in front of witnesses. Good. Paul nodded. Is Sarah informed about the entire plan? Yes, Victoria confirmed. She will drive to the cafe without us, enter alone, sit at the table, and behave completely naturally, as if nothing happened. The dictaphone is in her bag. She must not take it out. The most important thing is that Kane himself confirms that he knows about the origin of the information and is ready to accept it. And if he refuses? If he says he doesn't know what she's talking about, then Sarah has to insist, Owen explained. She has to remind him of their previous agreements and mention the sum she was promised. All of that will be recorded. Even if he doesn't take the documents, the intent of the handover and his knowledge of it will be proven. Paul looked at the watch. 5:30, we are leaving. Owen, you drive. Victoria, take the documents. Chris, you stay here and hold the fort. If something goes wrong, I'll call. They went down to the parking lot and got into an inconspicuous dark sedan. Owen started the car and they drove out into the evening streets of the city. The traffic jams were not too bad, and after 20 minutes they parked near Café Central. From here, the entrance was clearly visible, but they could not be recognized from the outside. At 6:45 p.m., a taxi stopped in front of the cafe and Sarah got out. She was dressed strictly, a black pantsuit, a light blouse, hair pinned up. She held a small leather bag in her hands. Paul watched her enter without looking back. Maximilian is already in position, Owen reported, looking at his phone. Sarah has sat down and ordered a coffee. She seems calm. 10 minutes of agonizing waiting passed. Silence reigned inside the car, interrupted only by the noise of passing cars. At 6:58 p.m., a black SUV pulled up in front of the cafe. A man of about 50 got out, tall, slightly graying, in an expensive coat. Paul recognized him from the photo Owen had shown in the morning. Victor Kane. He's here, Owen said quietly and turned on the phone speaker. Muffled sounds from the cafe penetrated through the speaker, the clatter of dishes, soft music, voices of guests. Then Sarah's voice rang out clearly. Good evening, Mr. Kane. Good evening, Ms. Brennan, the male voice answered. Excuse the delay. Traffic was terrible. It's all right. I just arrived too. Please sit down. The sound of a chair being moved was heard. What would you like to drink? Sarah asked. Espresso, said Kane, apparently calling the waiter. A pause ensued, then Kane's voice became quieter, more confidential. So, have you brought everything? Paul tensed up. Here we go. Yes. Sarah's voice was calm. The USB stick with all the documents we discussed. Contracts, customer contact details, the strategy plan for the next year. Excellent. Satisfaction resonated in Kane's voice. That is exactly what we need. With this information, we can seriously pressure Williams on the market. And how about my hiring? You promised me the position of HR director. Of course, Kane assured. As soon as you have officially resigned, we will hire you immediately. $8,500, as discussed, plus bonuses for special merits. For this information, I'll even add another $10,000 on top. Paul felt the tension. $10,000. So that was the price for Sarah's betrayal. Give me the stick, Kane requested. A soft sound was heard, as if Sarah had placed the stick on the table. Here you go, she said. Wonderful. Kane's voice sounded pleased. Ms. Brennan, you won't regret it. With us, you will be able to unleash your full potential. Owen, now, Paul ordered briefly. Owen pressed a button on the phone, the signal for the police officer. After 30 seconds, the officer entered the cafe. Paul got out of the car together with Victoria. They hurried to the entrance. A police officer in uniform came toward them, a young man around 30 with a determined face. Detective Vance, he introduced himself. Let's go. They entered the cafe. Owen led them to the back room. At the table by the window sat Sarah and Kane. On the table between them lay a small black USB stick. Kane was just reaching for it when he saw the approaching people accompanied by the policeman. His face changed instantly, from satisfaction to lack of understanding, then to unrest. "What is going on here?" he asked harshly and stood up. "Victor Kane." Vance took out his ID. "Detective Vance, please come with me to establish the facts." "For what reason?" Kane tried to keep his composure. "I haven't violated anything." "Because of receiving information that constitutes a trade secret," Paul said calmly as he stepped closer. "Good evening, Mr. Kane. We already spoke on the phone today. Do you remember?" Kane paled. His gaze darted to the USB stick on the table. I don't understand what you are talking about," he stammered. "Stop it." Paul nodded to Owen. He took out the tablet and started the recording. The voices, the conversation that had just taken place at this table, poured from the speakers. Kane listened and his face became gloomier and gloomier. That is a provocation," he exclaimed. "An illegal recording. Completely lawful," Victoria Jennings contradicted, pulling out documents. "The law allows the holder of a trade secret to use all legally permissible means for its protection. An audio recording in a public place is admissible. You are in a cafe. This is not a private space. Please, everyone come to the precinct," Vance repeated. "We will create the protocol there." Kane sank back onto the chair, realizing he was trapped. Sarah sat motionless, staring at the table. Tears ran down her cheeks and smeared her mascara. Paul took the USB stick from the table and gave it to Victoria. "Let's put this with the files," he said. "Let's go." At the police station, recording the protocol took more than 2 hours. Kane tried to deny everything that had been recorded. He claimed his words were taken out of context, and he hadn't understood exactly what information was involved. But when Victoria Jennings presented the printout of Sarah's email correspondence with him, in which the terms of the deal, the sums, and the list of documents to be handed over stood black on white, he fell silent. Paul sat in the cold hallway of the station and thought about how quickly a reputation could be ruined. Yesterday, Status Tech was considered a dynamically growing company that competed aggressively but fairly in the market. And today their development director was caught red-handed receiving stolen information. Tomorrow the entire business world of the city would learn about it. The day after tomorrow the whole state. The reputational damage would be enormous. By 9:30 p.m., everything was done. The protocol was signed. The USB stick was secured as evidence. The statements were documented. Kane drove away in a taxi, grim and furious. Sarah followed shortly after. "Well, Mr. Williams," Owen Matthews said as they stepped into the open air, "consider the operation successfully completed. Everything is documented. All evidence is secured." "Yes," Paul nodded. "Thank you for the work. Tomorrow we start preparing the lawsuit." He arrived home after midnight, completely exhausted, but couldn't fall asleep. The events of the last 2 days went through his head. The little girl in the hallway who had accidentally overheard a strange conversation. It was strange how sometimes little things decided the fate of a company. The next morning, Paul came to the office at 8 a.m. First, he called George Reynolds and Victoria Jennings to him. "George, start preparing the civil lawsuit against Status Tech," he ordered. "We demand full compensation, $150, 000 plus court costs. Victoria, prepare all legal documents." "Will do," George nodded. "And what about Sarah?" Victoria asked. "Formally, we promised not to sue her." "And we won't," Paul confirmed. "She fulfilled her part of the agreement and helped with the documentation. It stays at immediate termination. That is punishment enough." "When should the termination be executed?" "Today," said Paul. "She should come around noon, pick up her reference letter and her personal things. The sooner we close this story, the better." Victoria went to finish the documents and Paul remained alone with George. "What do you think is the probability of winning the process?" he asked the finance director. George shrugged. 80%, he answered. "Our evidence is watertight. The recording of the conversation, the email traffic, Sarah's statement, the USB stick. Status Tech will likely try to negotiate a settlement to avoid publicity. That is more advantageous for them than a defeat in court." "We will see," Paul said. "It is important that everyone understands people don't play such games with our company." At 11:30 a.m., Sarah came to the office. Paul saw her from the window of his office. She walked slowly from the parking lot as if every step was difficult for her. The groomed business lady from the day before had given way to a tired, exhausted woman. 20 minutes later, Victoria called and informed him that everything was done. Sarah had received her reference with a note of immediate termination. She had collected her things from the office and left. "How is she?" Paul asked. "She cried," Victoria said quietly. "She asked me to tell you that she is very sorry. She said you were right. She betrayed those who trusted her." Paul didn't answer. Remorse changed nothing now. Documents had been handed over. Damage had occurred. Reputation was ruined. After lunch, Chris Collins came to him. "Mr. Williams' news," he said. Status Tech called. "Their CEO asks for a meeting. He wants to discuss the situation." How fast they react. Paul smirked. "Good. Set the meeting for Thursday in our office. Tell them to come with their lawyer." The meeting took place on Thursday morning. The CEO of Status Tech, Michael Sullivan, turned out to be a serious man of about 60 with traces of fatigue on his face. He was accompanied by their company lawyer, a young man in an expensive suit who was visibly nervous. Paul received them in the conference room. The atmosphere was tense. "Mr. Williams," Sullivan began, "I came to try to solve our problem peacefully. What happened is a misunderstanding. Kane acted without my knowledge. I only learned about it yesterday evening when he reported the incident." "And misunderstanding?" Paul raised an eyebrow. "Your development director knowingly accepted stolen information. That is documented, recorded, and confirmed by a protocol. What kind of misunderstanding is that supposed to be?" Sullivan sighed heavily. "I understand your position. Kane has already been fired. We conducted an internal investigation and established that he acted on his own authority without informing management. That was his personal initiative that brought you 3 big contracts," George Reynolds reminded him. "Are you saying you didn't ask yourself where suddenly such precise information about the competition's offers came from?" The lawyer from Status Tech chimed in. "We could not be held liable for the actions of a single employee if they occurred without the management's authorization." "Yes, you can," Victoria Jennings contradicted quietly. "According to federal law, a legal entity is liable for damages caused by its employees in the performance of their duties. Kane acted within the scope of his powers. He solicited customers and developed the business. The fact that the methods were illegal does not absolve the company of responsibility." Sullivan was silent for a moment and thought about what he had heard. "Good," he finally said. "Let's speak openly. What do you demand?" "Compensation," Paul said clearly. $150,000. Those are the direct losses from the 3 contracts you obtained thanks to the stolen information, plus a public apology and the admission of unfair competition. $150,000. Sullivan paled. "That would ruin us." "You should have thought about that sooner," George said harshly. Sullivan exchanged glances with his lawyer. The lawyer quickly noted something on a piece of paper and passed it on. Sullivan read it and nodded. "Mr. Williams," he said, "I offer you a settlement. We pay you $90,000 as compensation and renounce the 3 disputed contracts. You can try to win back the customers, and we publicly admit that information was obtained by unlawful means. In return, you waive the lawsuit in court and don't make this a huge public issue." Paul narrowed his eyes and considered. $90,000 is too little, he said. $110,000. And we get the customers back without you offering resistance. In addition, you publish an official statement in which you acknowledge guilt. Sullivan consulted with his lawyer in whispers. $110,000, he proposed. And we publish the statement, but without mentioning concrete sums and details. We simply admit to the violation of business ethics. Paul looked at George. He nodded. "The sum is acceptable." "Agreed," Paul said. "Victoria drafts the settlement. The money must be transferred within 2 weeks. The statement will be published by Monday at the latest." "Agreed." Sullivan nodded and offered him his hand. Paul shook it. The handshake was brief and formal. When the guests had gone, George rubbed his hands together with satisfaction. $110,000. "An excellent result," he said. "Plus we get the customers back." We not only plugged the hole in the budget, but also restored our market position. Yes, Paul agreed. But that is not the most important thing. And what is the most important thing? That we showed no one plays dirty games with us, Paul said. Everyone will remember this lesson. In the evening of the same day, when the office was almost empty, Paul remembered Linda and Mila. It had been the little girl who had set this whole chain of events in motion. He asked Allison to find Linda. The cleaning lady worked one floor below. 10 minutes later, there was a timid knock at his office door. Linda entered in her washed-out smock. "Did you call me Mr. Williams?" she asked quietly. "Is something wrong?" "Everything is fine, Linda," Paul reassured her. "Do sit down." "Where is Mila?" "Downstairs. She is busy with her coloring books." Linda sat on the edge of the chair. "Did she do something wrong?" "Quite the opposite." Paul smiled. "She helped the company a lot. Thanks to her, we prevented a serious leak of information." Linda looked at him uncomprehendingly. "Mila helped." Paul told her briefly what had happened, without going into too much detail. Linda listened with wide eyes. "My God," she whispered, "I didn't know anything about that. She didn't tell me anything." "I had asked her to keep it to herself for the time being," Paul explained. "But now it's all over, and I want to thank you. You and Mila." "Us? For what?" Linda was stunned. "For the honesty," Paul said simply. "Mila could have remained silent. You could have forbidden her to tell the boss anything. But she did the right thing, and thanks to her, the company was spared huge damage." He opened his desk drawer and took out an envelope. "This is for you," he said, and handed Linda the envelope. "A bonus, $2,500. Consider it a thank you from the company." Linda took the envelope with trembling hands, opened it, saw the banknotes, and immediately closed it again. "I can't accept that," she stammered. "That is way too much. I only clean the floors." "Yes, you can," Paul said firmly. "You are an honest person, and you are raising your daughter the same way. That is priceless. And one more thing. Starting Monday, you will be transferred to the position of assistant to building management. Your salary will be $45,000 a year. You work the day shift from 9 to 5. So you can pick up Mila from kindergarten on time." Linda stared at him, unable to bring out a word. Tears ran down her cheeks. I don't know what to say," she whispered. Thank you very, very much." "Go on," Paul smiled. "And give Mila this." He took a large plush bear out of the closet, 3 feet tall, soft and fluffy. He had bought it yesterday on the way home. "And tell her that she is great, a very brave girl." Linda took the bear, pressed it to herself, and began to cry again. Paul waited until she had calmed down and accompanied her to the door. Left alone, he stepped to the window. Down on the illuminated parking lot stood his car. Around him the lights of the city, stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there in one of the apartments, Sarah Brennan was trying to comprehend how she could align her life so wrongly. Somewhere employees of Status Tech were discussing the scandal and considering what would become of their reputation now. And he, Paul Williams, stood in his office and grasped a simple truth. In business as in life, money or connections do not decide. It is honesty that counts. A little girl was more honest than an adult, experienced professional with 2 diplomas, and this honesty saved the company he had built for 20 years. It's a heartwarming end for Linda and Mila. Do you think Sarah deserved the harsh consequences she faced, or should she have been given a second chance? In the following week, Status Tech published an official statement admitting that violations of ethical norms had occurred in the course of business operations. The company apologized and committed to observing fair competition in the future. The $110,000 arrived in Williams Solutions' account 10 days later. 3 customers who had migrated to the competition returned after learning the truth. Linda Taylor started her new job and did her thing excellently. Mila walked around happily with her huge bear and had the feeling of having done something very important, even if she didn't quite understand what it was. Paul filed this story in his memory as an important lesson, a lesson that salvation sometimes comes from where one least expects it, and that childlike honesty can be wiser than adult calculation. We've listened to this strong woman's story together. I'm grateful to her for sharing her courage with us. So, What do you think? If you were in her place, could you make these difficult decisions? Share your thoughts with me in the comments. I read each one and try to respond. Thank you for being here with me. See you in the next story.